Jay, Wendy, my heroes. You ever think about how wild it is that like you may have missed it your entire life by 5 minutes, right? Like, isn't that like Steve Jobs has a great quote about you can only connect the dots looking backward. You can only see like this led to here, this led to here. That might have been, was that in the one thing, that quote?
Yeah.
I read that somewhere.
I was going to say, I think that sounds awfully familiar. No, that's great.
You're quoting Jay right now.
Yeah, I'm quoting you, quoting someone else.
But that's okay.
I told you, it made a big impact, man.
At our wedding, though, like you picked out that poem about like, there were doorknobs that was still warm from your hand and then my hand. And it's this idea about there's so many chances to miss before you connect.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right. We can get all cheesy. Everybody's like, oh, I'm going to barf in this episode.
Aw, so sweet.
Oh, no, I love it. All right, so we have the BW and AW, before and after. So what did you guys do then together? I mean, like you got together, got married at some point?
Yeah, the first big adventure, we wanted to leave New York City. That's where we met. And we both wanted to travel. So we kind of agreed after we got married that we would quit our jobs. We threw all of our stuff in storage, and we went backpacking in Europe and North Africa for about 5 months.
Yeah, we said, let's have a cheap wedding and an expensive honeymoon.
Ooh, I love that. Where's your favorite place you went?
Well, I'm going to say Matato.
Yeah, of course.
I've never even heard of that. What is that?
So I lived in Paris for a while with one of my best buddies from high school, Brian Justice. And he went away for his junior year abroad, fell in love with an Italian girl, and has never come back. And during that time, they would go to this little village in northwestern Tuscany called Matato in the mountains. And he kind of fell in love with the village. And I remember I'd just been there for 3 months. I barely spoke French. And he goes, I think I'm going to buy this olive farm. And we went down there, and he ended up buying it. And it's about like at this point, like a 35-year rehab.
Yeah, so 35-year rehab.
It's like the longest rehab of all time.
Of which we were involved in on our honeymoon.
Yes.
The very first day of our honeymoon, we had to walk down to the river and collect rocks. And I was like...
This is not romantic.
I was like, this is not what I thought of for my honeymoon. But it was romantic.
But we, like not Wendy and I, but before that, we put in the bathrooms. We put in the first shower. Like there were no windows. It was like a barn house that we rebuilt. And he has taken it to where... I mean, it's an Airbnb.
Yeah, matato.com. Just a shout out. Yeah.
Well, that's funny. Like, this is one of my early Christmas gifts to him.
This is good.
I was like, I should get Brian, who's not very tech savvy. I got him the URL. I was just going to look for a URL because I knew he wanted to rent it someday. Yeah. Back then, in the early 2000s, like I got the whole .com for the town, Matato.com, and people would come there, and he's like this American guy who owns a house, and they're like, "You own the town name?" He's like, "Yeah." Pointed it out as rental property.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah.
All right, so that is an awesome way to begin a marriage. So out traveling the world.
Yep.
Where's your least favorite place? Did you have any horror stories of that trip?
Well, that first night in Tunisia was pretty horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had it was like. This was like really before you could get a lot of travel information on the internet or anything. I mean, this was 1999. Mm-hmm. And so it was probably Lonely Planet recommendation for a hotel in Tunisia, and it was horrible. Like we got in the room, and there were just dead, bloody mosquitoes all over every wall. Oh. And mosquitoes love Jay, so he was like, get me out of here. But we spent the night, and then we hightailed it out of there in the morning.
You know, in those movies where like the hero is like some spy and the man is chasing him and he ends up in some seedy city and he's wounded and he lays up in some that's where we slept. Yeah, that was it.
Whoops.
Oh, amazing.
Oh, well.
All right, so I want to get into your bringing up to modern life here. But before we do, one thing on this show that we always do is we donate 100% of the profits, or not profits, all the ad revenue from every show to a charity of the guest's choosing. So question is, what charity or what cause or mission breaks your heart?
We picked the same one for
this,
didn't
we did. Yeah, we picked Red Oak Hope.
Red Oak Hope. Tell me about that.
Red Oak Hope is an organization that helps women who've been trafficked. It's actually based in Austin, Texas, and we've helped them with several fundraisers, and they do really important work.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, similar mission to what we're doing. That's cool.
That was where I connected with Paul Moore, another investor. Same thing, same mission. And Addie was, we do an inspirational brunch at one of our events. And our HR director had met her and interviewed her on the stage. And it was just gripping. It was like this 21, 22-year-old woman traveling, and a woman approaches her and says, "Can you help me?"
Yeah.
Can you save me?
can you save me? And then she does, which is the extraordinary thing. Like
Yeah.
most people are like, I got to call the cops.
Yep.
But she does the whole clandestine thing to get her back home. And then all of her friends start calling her. And then it became her mission.
Well, she actually got back and she was like, "Phew, well, thank goodness that's over, and then another woman approached her, and so, when God taps you on the shoulder.
Yeah, that reminds me of the. I said it on stage earlier today, but when I talked to a gentleman about human trafficking recently, and I said something about it being a coincidence that we're chatting today, and he said, "Oh, it's not a coincidence. God's assembling His forces to take down evil."
Yeah.
And this guy's a Navy SEAL, and I'm like, "Yeah, let's go!"
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was so powerful. And I think that it was really powerful when you said that to me. That was like my big takeaway from this morning, which is when we can get out of our own way enough to really be so intentional and true to ourselves and be running towards, God's gift to us. That is what happens. And that is a testament to you and what you've done. And that is what is happening to you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, what is let me give you a broad question. What does financial freedom mean to each of you? Like with that phrase, what does that mean? I know you teach it, but what does that mean to you? And why is it so important?
Financial freedom. Well, I think I'm not sure who it was, but it was Tim Ferriss who talked about being a time billionaire. We talk about being a money billionaire, but I love this idea of being a time billionaire, so that you can, you talked about it, do what you want with who you want for as long as you want, whenever you want.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What about you, Jay?
I love that. Like you said it, I associate that with Morgan Housel, who's the first person that articulated that so perfectly. I was like, wow, that's the definition of health and wealth, right?
Yeah.
You can't do it without your health either.
Yep.
When we wrote The Millionaire Real Estate Investor, it was having the unearned income to finance your mission in life without having to work.
Yes.
And so, like, I love the be able to do what you want with whom you want for as long as you want, whenever you want.
Yep.
That is the freedom part, which has always been a part of it. But the longer we're on this journey, the more I connect it to being able to put more into the mission.
Yeah.
Because you figure out at some point, like, we're kind of done.
Yeah.
So what do we strive? How do we make ourselves better by striving? It's got to be for someone else.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, like, how do we teach people to go there faster?
Yeah. Yeah, there was an episode actually. In fact, I mentioned that quote earlier about you can only connect the dots looking backwards, and I'm gonna connect one right here. Is that I actually listened to an episode that you did with Gary of like Think Like a CEO. Am I saying that name right?
Yeah.
There was an episode where you said, I don't know if it was him or you, but you were talking about that line about financial freedom. I think you asked Gary, like, how do you define financial freedom? And he said it's your bills are paid. He said it way more eloquently than I ever would, but your bills are paid so you can do your mission.
Right.
Right. And
that's the epigram in The Millionaire Real Estate Investor.
Okay.
It's the unearned income to finance your mission in life without having to work.
Yeah.
And
that made a huge, huge impact on my life.
Yeah,
And I
it's
was
like enough passive income to fund your perfect life.
Yeah. It's powerful because I think a lot of people, especially in our real estate world, they just have the dreams of the big boat and the big car and the big house and the big plane, and maybe that plays into it. I mean, good for people who have the jet. I'm gonna have a jet someday. I'm name it, claiming it, right? I'm gonna want one. But that's not the mission.
It's a hollow journey.
Yeah,
it can be a hollow journey.
if you're playing the I'll be happy win game, it's really dangerous, right? And a lot of people think, I'll have respect when, I'll be happy when, whatever. There's like an emotional connection to the achievement that's not promised.
Yeah.
So if you're doing it for yourself, I don't pretend to think that you'll be happy when you get the jet. You're already one of the happiest people I've met. But that's something different. That's some other like milestone. But I just think there's a lot of people that we know, especially in our industry, that are working for money so that other people see them attaining the things with money. Yeah. And then you get there and then it has to be something else. Like that's a well that never gets full.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'll be happy when you get the jet.
Yeah. I will be happy when I get the jet.
It's kind of like having a yacht. You want
especially when you're
a friend
flying.
that's got a yacht.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. Yeah, it's funny. Gary Vaynerchuk once said how, he talks a lot about buying the New York Jets. So it's his like thing. He talks all about I'm going to buy the Jets someday. It's the Jets, right? Yeah, he's always talking about the Jets, right? And then I heard a line once. He's like, I don't actually care about buying the Jets. It's just a fun thing, and he might actually buy it someday. He says, but he might not. But it's a cool like mission that's so big to say like that's going to keep me like, it's something the distance I can swim toward. You know, when you're out in the ocean, you're like swimming, you're like, well, that's the lighthouse. I can keep going towards that. And so he's like, I don't actually care about the jets.
Yeah.
He just cares about having somewhere to head toward. And so the literal, you know, he's talking about the jets. I'm talking about a jet. I'm like, a jet is almost like I use that as almost a,
it's like a metaphor.
yeah, almost a metaphor for just like financial success in
Stretching
general.
yourself.
Yep.
Yeah, because the way you have your value set, like how much wealth would you have to amass for that to actually be something that you would say
A
yes
no-brainer
to?
for you.
Yeah.
It's a way of
Yeah.
thinking really, really big.
Yes, exactly what that
Warren
is.
Buffett's team.
Yeah.
Warren Buffett's team made him buy a private jet, right? And
Yep.
do you know what he named it?
No.
I think it's called the Indefensible,
That's funny.
right? But they just said like it's not just about being an asset.
Yep.
It's about your time.
Yeah.
And when you're operating at that level, your time's so valuable that saving 4 hours instead of even flying first class to going private, it was material. His dollars per hour. I mean, can you imagine?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that once. I never even thought of the jet until somebody explained it that way. They said, "What's 2 hours with your kids?" And they said, "If you travel, 3-4 times a month, which
Yeah.
I probably travel that much," and they're like, "You're losing 8-10 hours a month with your kids.
It's a lot.
On having to get the TSA early and all that stuff." And they said, "What's that worth?"
Well, especially you only get a few hours a day with your kids.
Yeah.
You
Yep.
know?
And so what's
So-
it worth? Yeah, it's potentially doubling the amount of free time you have with your kids
Yeah.
or your family. And they're like, what is that worth? Is that worth? And we're real estate people, so we tend to find ways to hack it anyway. So it's like, if I can find a way to rent it out when I'm not using it, can I
Sure,
get a
of
free jet?
course.
Probably. Do I get the
Yeah.
tax write-off? Of course. Like,
Yeah.
when you start thinking how instead of should I? So
You just
again,
need
it's
someone to
yeah.
sponsor a jet for you.
Yes, there we go. That's a
Hello, universe.
Yeah, come on, we're gonna get it. So we mentioned the word happiness earlier.
Brought
and
to you by
yeah.
Beardy Brew.
Yeah, Beardy Brew. Thank you for it, Beardy Brew. The only coffee with a real piece of beard hair in every cup. That's not our slogan.
That's horrible.
Yeah, it's great coffee. So
Very earthy.
very
Yeah.
organic.
Yes.
A little hairy. What is happiness? If you had to define, put a definition on happiness, how would you define it?
Go ahead.
I'm going to go first.
Well.
So, like, we wrote about this in the one thing. I think happiness is that feeling you get, and it's often temporary, around the things that bring you joy. And we just tried to be really careful distinguishing between being happy and fulfillment. And fulfillment is about the feeling you get when you're making progress on your mission towards your big goals. And there's something, even like it's been a horrible day, but it was good work.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't always feel happy. And so I try to focus on that. When we get to my favorite book, like ultimately happiness is a choice. So that's how I would fill in that blank. Happiness is a choice. You can choose to give yourself happiness. And that's probably the most important, like, aha of my lifetime is like, yes, this thing happened. It doesn't have to affect how I feel about everything else.
Yeah. How's that sound?
That sounds fantastic. Yeah, let's go with that.
You made me go first. I was sitting there all internal on the question.
Well, and I think what I think about what comes to mind for me is so many people choose comfort over this idea of happiness. They confuse comfort with happiness.
Yeah.
And I'm like you. I think happiness comes from fulfillment. I mean, we are financially free, so we don't need to work. But I mean, really, am I just going to sit around all day and do nothing? No, I'm not. But for a lot of people, that is their choice. They think that comfort is what is going to bring them happiness. But so many people who are quote unquote comfortable, they're miserable.
Yeah.
Well,
I get this question all the time, and I'm going to throw it at you, but hopefully with a different attitude. I get this question of, Brandon, when's enough? Like, why are you working so much? Why are you working so hard? Why are you trying to build another business or grow your real estate? Why do you need 10 billion of real estate instead of a billion? Like, and there's this attitude of, I'm doing something wrong. Like, why can't I just be satisfied? I'm assuming you guys have gotten that as well. What's your answer to that? Like, why do you still do it?
Well,
You briefly entertained Enough Was Enough. Remember that?
Well, I do go through that. I think that's a very real question. And I think if somebody feels that way, I think that's okay too.
Yeah.
I do believe that when you stop growing, you do start dying.
Yeah.
So whatever growth looks like for you, if you want to quit your job and learn how to become a Asian stick fighting expert or whatever, then you're still growing in that arena. But I like to think of myself as a work of art, which is like, I'm just fine the way I am,
Yeah.
and a work in progress. So both. And it's hard to, if you're a striver, it's hard to hold both of those things because so often we never look back and appreciate where we've come from. And
Yeah.
so you have to be purposeful about that.
You know, it's fascinating. We can do that with our kids, right? I've talked about this in previous episodes, but you can look at your son and say, I love you 100% exactly as you are.
Mm-hmm.
I love you exactly. I'm looking at him in the eyes. Yeah, your son is in the room, actually.
We love
This
you,
is-
Gus.
Yeah, Gus,
Yes.
we love you. Exactly as you are. I'm perfectly 100% happy with where you are right now. But it doesn't mean I want you to stay there forever. I would love to see you grow. I'd love to see you get a career and get, family and all like that would be great. So there's this duality there where we can be perfectly 100% content, but also be okay with ambition. And I think somewhere in there lies the answer, but it's easier for us to do it with our kids, isn't it, than it is to do with ourselves.
Yeah.
I think there's a because between those two. Because I love you so much,
Yeah.
I want that for you,
Yeah.
right? I want you to be seeking a life of
Yeah.
growth.
My pastor recently said, I remember this line, it was so good. He said, God loves you too much to leave you the way you are. And I thought that's a great, it's because of love that we grow.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes growth looks really different. So you might be at the pinnacle of success in your industry, but you have so many areas of your life to grow in. So
Yeah.
it's almost going back and saying, like, how can I be a better friend? How
Yeah.
can I be a better father? How can I, that is your growth area.
Yeah.
So you don't always have to constantly be growing in every single area of your life all
Yep.
the time. And so it's just, picking what works for you in that moment.
Yeah.
So.
One thing that we do inside of the Better Life Tribe is, we always start doing an analysis, basically the wheel of life. I'm sure you've done that. It's pretty typical, personal development thing where you look at all the 10 or, 8, 10, 12, whatever areas of your life, career, business, finance, health, family, all that. And you kind of rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how you're doing on that. And I try to have everyone in the tribe do that every single quarter. So we have kind of a pulse because as you said in the one thing, and I love this, I say it all the time, it's not about work-life balance. It's a work-life balancing.
Yep.
Can you explain what does that mean that because it applies not just work-life, but work-health balance and life-health balance, life-spirituality balance.
Where people get wrong is they think that balance is a destination, a place that you somehow magically arrive and you've arrived.
Yeah.
Right? I've got everything in perfect balance. Now I can just say my alms and everything is going to work out. But it's a verb.
Yeah.
And it's something like, even a ballerina standing on her, toes, it looks like she's in perfect balance. But if you zoom in, that ankle's going back. It's counterbalancing constantly. It's just a verb. And I think it's much more healthy to think about, especially if you're trying to achieve life, to be very actively engaged in the balancing and rebalancing around the areas of your life. You can neglect your health while you're working on this conference. You won't sleep as much as you normally do.
Yep.
And I think I even saw you post about how can I be better about my diet and my health habits when I'm doing this.
Yep.
You'll be a little out of balance, but then you really focus on getting back into balance. You can't just keep, ignoring that because you'll pay a big price.
Yeah.
Well, we also have a seasonality to our lives. If you've got young kids, you're going to be in a different season. We're at the place now where we've got a 17 and 18-year-old at home. So we're asking ourselves, what does our house look like with an empty nest? And so it's just to remember that too. It's not going to be a stagnant thing.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it's always changing,
Yep.
and I think that's why we make people do the wheel of life every quarter, and every time we get together, we're like, where do you need work right now? Where do you need to focus your life? Because otherwise it's easy to get out of balance for a long time.
Our coaches do that in our organization. It's we use page 114 of the one thing where you have the 7 circles, which is, look, I didn't know it was called a wheel of life. We just organically ended up there.
Yeah.
But rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 and pick the one that you want to focus on. And doing that quarterly is the best practice. It's a snapshot.
Yep.
Because you get in and out of balance and at least you're asking the question.
Yeah. Yeah, I get asked
Especially
a
with
lot.
relationships.
Well, I love that because we have all these KPIs for our business.
Yeah.
It's what are your KPIs for the rest of your life?
That's such a good question. What does the KPI for your life look like? And if we don't take a minute to look at it, it's just like a business owner who's if you're hey, how you doing on leads right now? I have no idea. I'm what's your finances like? No idea. I haven't looked at my checking account ever.
Yeah.
You're probably not doing a very good job at your business.
No. Well, it's
unless
like
you're lucky, but
and I always say we've been on we have a date night every Wednesday, and we've been on over 800 dates. It's like, what are the metrics of your personal life?
Yeah.
We've been playing with that a lot. One of Wendy's friends, Carissa, was talking about how she went from being afraid of the numbers of her business to loving it and even got a tattoo. The path
really?
is in the math.
Yeah.
And it's true. Like on almost everything, you can find a measurement that if you focus on that, it gets better.
Yeah.
But most people haven't stopped to ask, what's my number?
Yep. Yeah, that's beautiful. One thing I love to do, and we do it inside the tribe as well, is we'll take the idea of, okay, who is it you want to be? Identity-based, we call it identity-based goal setting. I want to be this person. And I always ask the question to people, who do you know that already has that? It's like, who's awesome at that thing? So when it came to like business, I looked at it and I said, my friend David Osborne, he runs a business the way that I want to run a business. Like that's kind of my mentor in business. So I said, okay, well, what does David do? And then all of a sudden, then you start getting the KPIs. You're like, well, he meets with his person this many times. Yeah, it's like, and it's very easy to ask somebody. Like, it's one thing if I go to you and I'm like, as a writer, and I'm gonna go, hey, will you be my mentor and teach me everything about writing? Like, that's a weird thing. But if I was like, what are your habits when it comes to writing?
Yeah.
In fact, Jay, what are your habits when it comes to writing? As a person who's sold over 6 million books, what are your habits when it comes to writing?
For me, it all starts with what I'm reading.
Okay.
So I had a mentor. His name was Burla. He wrote FedEx Delivers. And my dad set me up with a meeting with him early on, and he just said, professional writers, creativity is connecting the dots. To be a professional writer, you need to have more dots to connect. Ooh. So read with purpose. And that really stuck with me. And I looked up, and I was mostly reading fiction. I love to read fiction. It's like, that's where my work brain turns off. Yep. And now I just read one nonfiction, and then I can treat myself to a fiction. I still want to read for entertainment, and I just go back and forth, but I'm reading with a lot more purpose these days. So I think I heard James Clear say your outputs are they're downstream of your inputs.
Yeah. Yep.
So like, what are we putting in? You talked about it today, like the media, what are we consuming is going to inform. So that to me is the baseline. If I'm reading great work, then those ideas are in my head for me to connect in new ways. Yeah. And I'm all about, how can I make this practical and simple and accessible? Yep. Because I want people to do something with it. Yes. So I can take something very esoteric and say, now what do you do with it? Yeah. So I don't have to have the original idea. I just want to make it practical. And then, I mean, everybody says it. You've got to write. Yeah. So like, for the first time in my life, I've had a weekly deadline. This last year, I gave myself a weekly deadline for writing a newsletter called The 20%er. Yeah. And it sucked, right? It was on me. I've got to write it. I mean, Wendy would see me. It's like, you're working on the weekend again. And I'm like, and I get to write. And I get to write. And I get to publish. And
we're not going to go there.
I know. You have a different feeling about this. But it's been a huge gift. And it was like, that scene in Rocky before the big fight where he's chasing chickens and hanging from the rafters and doing sit-ups. It's like, I feel like I'm in that routine. I've got a manuscript that I'm working on. Gary hasn't been in the writing room right now. Yeah. But like, I feel like I'm in fighting shape every week, because every week I have to write something original and publish it. Yeah. And I've never done that to myself. Like, writing books, like, it'll take a few years. Yep. Like, you wait until it's perfect. So read and write in that order, I think, with purpose. Yeah. And you'll get there.
So now to pull that into the example is, okay, so now if I want to write a book, I just asked you that question. Now I got two things I can now KPI track. Am I reading nonfiction? And am I writing every day?
Well, if you were writing fiction, you would be reading
fiction.
That's right. So are you purposefully reading, and how many books are you getting through? Yeah.
And now I can track that. Like, I use a habit tracker. There's lots of different habit trackers out there. We do it in the tribe. We do it, are you doing it? And if not, if you know you're doing it, then you're probably going to, and if you don't get the results, then maybe you have the wrong input. So if the output that you're getting is dirty, then go clean up your input and fix it. Yeah.
The gap between those two is, while you're reading, like Gus is helping me like dissect a podcast, right? Yeah. He's my apprentice for a little while. And I was like, I want this cut into quotes. Go and get the actual transcript, and like who said it and when they said it, so that like, this is all fodder for something. Like, we also do that with our books. Yeah. So I underline and I write, and all of that becomes stuff. If I'm reading those books, I don't have to go reread the book 5 years from now when I think, man, I should go back to Man's Search for Meaning, and that book taught me something. I can open up the opening pages, and so like, you have to go a little bit more than just reading it.
Yeah, I agree.
Right?
Yeah, I seldom read a nonfiction book without a pen in my hand.
God bless you.
I have to have that pen.
People
Underlined.
apologize. They'll like show me. I wrote all over it. I'm like, God, that's the best
Yes.
book, right? That meant you were actually interacting with it and having a conversation with it
Yeah.
the entire time.
You ever read the book? It was recommended by like 50 people. I finally read it. The Road Less Stupid from Keith Cunningham.
Keith Cunningham.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
There's a chapter in that book, chapter 10, and it's all about him and his buddies all went bankrupt back in the 80s or whatever. And so he's like, hey, me and my buddies all sat down and wrote down every lesson we learned in that time, and we just listed them out in this chapter. And it's just like 100 just one-liners.
It's so good.
I underlined every single verse,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like line
Yeah.
of that chapter.
I love that you just said verse.
Yeah,
Like,
I know.
Yeah.
It's my Bible right now because
Yeah.
we're in a very similar maybe time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why not learn from a guy who's been there
Yeah.
and done that? And like, this is what he learned. And so I mean,
Well, we took the 4-day MBA from Keith. He teaches a class
Really?
called the 4-day MBA, and it's
I didn't know
highly
that.
intensive. It's expensive. But
It'll
he-
teach
a
you
lot-
how to really read a balance sheet
Yeah.
and a P&L.
And a lot of those lessons came out. It was really good.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a story that I had read about, and I'm trying to think of what was the multifamily, the shopping mall investor that Gary modeled profit share on.
I don't know.
Anyway, it was in the Southwest. They owned more malls.
Wasn't it like the haircutting place?
No,
Oh.
no. It was a commercial investor.
Okay.
Anyway, they owned more shopping malls and commercial real estate than anyone else. And in the savings and loan bust, like they were in crisis, and they managed to come out of it and still be on top. Like they could, like most of those commercial buildings went back to the bank. They did the same thing. And there's a memo that was floating around where he had every executive write down what were the mistakes we made and what did we learn from them. And that document, which is almost impossible because it's all these old typed memos that have been mimeographed and photographed, it's almost impossible to read.
Yeah.
Like I made myself last year when we
is that
thought,
what you got? Oh, I
yeah,
remember that.
I went and downloaded that. I found it on the web finally, and then went through all 89 pages. And I was just underlining the lessons learned.
Yeah.
Too much leverage, right? They got ahead of their skis. They were buying way too much land because they
You
were.
wrote a copy of the 20% on that.
I did.
Yeah.
But it was like the same thing. It's like learning. People have lived before us, right?
Yeah.
They have real lessons to teach us
Yeah.
today. Like we'd be stupid not to listen.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. We can learn from our own mistakes by making the same ones, or we can learn from their mistakes and try to pick up some wisdom.
Or
Yeah.
some of each.
Yeah. All right. So where did the connection to Gary Keller come from? How did you get into the world of that, and that which led to Millionaire Real Estate Investor, which, back on Bigger Pockets when I was doing that, like I don't know, that was the second most commonly cited book behind Rich Dad Poor Dad as a book that like changed people's life. Yeah.
All
That
right.
book was everyone
it.
talked about it. So where you made a big impact with that one, but yeah, where did Gary enter the picture?
So after our honeymoon, right, that we were out backpacking, we knew that we didn't want to live in New York City and start a family there. So we had looked at a few destinations, like we had looked at Chapel Hill, North Carolina,
Raleigh, Durham.
Raleigh, Durham, and like Wendy had been to Austin a few times.
I loved Austin.
And so we went and spent a weekend there. And coming from New York City in January, like showing up in Austin, and it's like 79 degrees. We didn't have any of the right clothes. And it was like super warm and friendly, and all the food was cheap and plentiful.
Plenty of tacos, plenty
Oh,
of
yeah.
margaritas.
So it's basically like we loved it so much, we moved there without jobs.
Oh yeah.
And so Wendy got a job because she has a real career, PR and marketing at that time. And I was like an editor in New York publishing. Like
Yeah.
there was nothing.
Yeah.
And so I did a horrible job of freelancing until Wendy said, get a job. And one of the three places I applied to was
I would
Keller
come
Williams.
home. And
Well, I was done. I was playing Diablo by the time
Yeah.
she got home.
Jay was on the computer every day. I was like, okay, your freelancing days are over. You need to get a real job.
Financially, it was an inauspicious beginning to my half
Because
of the
I
marriage.
actually had 2 jobs at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, we that was great though. Like, so that person who's beating themselves up, you have hope because man, I was kind of a loser. It was me and the cat, right? And look up, and I applied for a newsletter writing job at Keller Williams, and when I joined, I was the employee number 27.
Yeah.
Wow.
Cato's
There-
Corner wasn't the name
Cato's
of the newsletter?
Corner.
Yeah.
And it was an internet newsletter for their tech team, and there were 6,700 agents total back then.
How many
And-
are there now?
180,000 in 57 countries.
Wow.
Incredible growth.
So it's been kind of a rocket ship ride. And
Yeah.
so like I got to start a bunch of departments, and I just liked it because they were very entrepreneurial. Like they handed me a copy of Rich Dad Poor Dad. The then president started our network journey.
Well, even the hiring process was incredible.
Yeah, I thought I was applying to be in the CIA.
Yeah.
They gave me like multiple behavioral instruments. I was like, it's a newsletter job.
Yeah.
Like it's $40,000 a year newsletter job. And they made me take 2 separate, like the disc and some other behavioral instrument, and then validated them at length. I was like, this is a front for the CIA.
Yeah.
There's no other way.
I was like, are you going to get this job or not?
But a couple of years into that, I found out he was writing books. And I bumped into him in the bathroom because we were still that small. He was like plunging a toilet. He owned the building. It was a Class C commercial space, and he made a joke about it. And I said, Gary, I hear you're writing a book. Do you remember I used to work at HarperCollins? And clearly he'd forgotten that part.
Yeah.
And he took me into his office, and it's not like the Fonz, like a stall.
Yeah.
Like we went into his actual office,
Real office.
and he had a vision for writing 13 books already. And he pitched me on the Millionaire Real Estate Agent and said, how many copies do you think it would sell? And I asked him a few questions. I said, if you really nail it, 50,000 copies, which, you know, is a lot.
Yeah,
And back then it
that's
would have been a
ton.
lot.
Yep.
Well, especially when there's only 6,000 agents at the
Yeah.
time, or 10,000 or whatever
But
it was
he-
at that point.
But he had a vision to do it as a business, and he wasn't happy with that answer. And he goes, will it be a bestseller? And I said, probably not. And because that's true of almost every book. And he laid out 5 books that he had been with his partner, then our partner, Dave Jinks, who's since passed away. They'd taken 5 books and were taking parts of them, like Good to Great, the executive summaries. Body for Life was a book about fitness. It had myths and truths. And Mia Hamm's Go for the Goal had these profiles of individuals and what they were really good at. And there was The Millionaire Next Door, which I went back and read, and it's not.
Oh, it's horrible.
But I still like the idea of it, right? And
It's so sexist.
yeah.
Funny.
But
I
it was
haven't read that in a
how.
long time.
Don't read it.
But he liked the idea that they went out and asked what all these people had in common.
Yeah.
Versus like one person's story. And I never can remember the 5th, but I edited Mia Hamm and Body for Life. And I just said, I showed him my name in the acknowledgments, and he basically called my boss.
Yeah.
And he said, good news, bad news.
Talk about serendipity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and said, Jay's got a new position. He doesn't work for you anymore. And I was applying to be his ghostwriter, basically, on the first book. That's how we started. Wrote the first book in a little over 90 days. And that one, not 50,000, is like 1.6 million copies now.
Amazing.
Wow. Yeah, that's wild.
The Bible of real estate.
It really is. I mean, that's the.
It's
that-
really good.
that is
It
the
still
book
it
people
still
talk
holds
about
up.
for agents.
15 years later.
Yeah. So what if you could sum up like what? I've not read Agent because I'm not an agent, so I've never thought about reading it really. But I have had people tell me I should read it because there's really good stuff in there, and I follow a lot of what Gary has said around like sales. Like a lot of my funnel stuff has come from that. So what is it? What are you teaching in that book, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent, and should a non-agent read it?
Yes, we get letters. Anybody who's in a service business, I think, could benefit from it. Because, and I was really there as a scribe, helping them. Like I was very new to the game then.
Yeah.
I wasn't. I was listed as a co-author, but I was more of a ghostwriter,
Yeah.
right? But they had spent collectively about 40 years at that point coaching business people how to be better business people. And why it was so popular is you had an industry, a growing industry of real estate agents that were seen as salespeople. Look at before Modern Family, there was not really a positive realtor ever portrayed.
Yes.
They're salespeople, and they wanted to be business people. And you had these generational shifts. You had people that their mom was a real estate agent, and they'd gone off, got their Penn degree, were working in New York City, and like, I hate my job, but my mom is free. And they were coming into like a higher caliber, like these people had MBAs, were showing up and saying,
They're leveling up.
they were leveling up. And so the message of the book is you're a business person, and this is what a business person does. And like the easiest, simple, like it's I do it, we do it, they do it. I do it as you're employed. We do it, you're self-employed. Like if you remove yourself from the equation, it ain't going to keep going. They do it as business income.
Yeah.
And I think people started really realizing the ultimate game is you can be a great salesperson, but learning to succeed through others is the ultimate hack.
Well, and what I think is remarkable about that book is I think a lot of books are based on one person's experience doing something.
Yes.
And you always have to be wary about those books because it could be luck, it could be whatever. But the Millionaire Real Estate Agent was based on 100 interviews of people who were netting $1 million in their business. And the Millionaire Real Estate Agent is not one single person. It's models based on that 100-person experience and research?
It was 27.
27.
We were so nobodies, people actually wouldn't take our call.
Wow.
They were like, who? Keller who?
Yeah.
But we managed to get 27 of the top 100 and do in-depth profiles with them.
Wow. So do you think, did the book lead to the growth? Like how much do you think, how much would you attribute the success of Keller Williams to the book versus just everything else? Like I know it's impossible to really answer, but.
Yeah, without going back and running a test case without
Sure.
it. I do know that they wanted something that could say we're a high production real estate team. Like RE/MAX was always like, we're the highest producing and still are in a lot of cases. And we were known as the training company for new agents. And Gary asked the question, how can we make our company fashionable for top agents? And so no one had ever actually done the math. How much real estate would you have to sell to net $1 million?
Yeah.
No one had actually done the math. So we did that. And we showed someone how to work backwards. If you want to do $1 million net, let's work backwards, goal setting to the now, before we were calling it that, to how many appointments I have to set with buyers and sellers. But that math works in any industry if you work backwards from a profit goal.
Yes.
And so
David Green, co-host of the Bigger Pockets, right? So David's Keller Williams, and he taught me that years ago. And he explained, because this is before he was making a lot of money as an agent, but we were friends, and he said, it's real simple, man. He's like, if you have, I don't remember what the number is, maybe you know it, but it's like, if you have this many people who would call you their agent, and on average, they move every, 7 years, it's just
numbers. The path is in the math.
Yep. And I remember, I never thought about business that way before. Like, that was my first introduction to funnels, which is how I operate everything today. It's like, it's very numbers driven. So then, but what I was good at was just pushing him. And so he was like, yeah, I hope within 5 years, I think it was his thing, within 5 years, I want to have those 3,000 people. So I was like, okay, well, what would it take to do in 6 months? It was kind of the Elon Musk question.
Yeah.
And then it was like, well, that's impossible. And we and him went back and forth for a while, and what was fun was in an hour-long discussion, we came up with 6 ways that he could build that list fast. I think it was like maybe 3,000 people or something like that. But it was like, okay, well, what if you did webinars? What if you have a billboard on the freeway? What if you did this? What if we did this? And all of a sudden you start thinking differently, right? And that's the power of that.
You're asking a bigger question.
Yes.
You're asking a bigger question. It's funny, Gary, at breakfast this morning, because I was writing about this, it's all about your database. Your business is your database. And showing in the math, if you had 10,000 people in your business database, 64% of people own a home. On average, they move every 10 years. That means if you had 10,000 people in your database, 640 of them statistically will sell at an average commission of 10,000. How much potential income is on that email list right now? Most people don't have a $7 million, $6.4 million asset that they're nurturing. They're chasing whatever it is, but right there in front of them on their phone and their data, 6.4 million potential, and they're spending all their time doing other stuff. Because it's not fun always to think about how do I create touches and interactions and connections with these people. Yeah,
it's great. And I think it was around that time that I took that methodology. It's funny, again, connecting dots looking back. So Bigger Pockets was a whole lot smaller then. And I don't know if I'm revealing too much about Bigger Pockets inner working here, but I'm going to do it anyway. We were, Bigger Pockets was small, wasn't making much money at all. We had our pro membership. And I remember Josh and I were trying to figure out, what do we do to grow it? And it was that conversation with David that was partially led to this, which was, and based on what Gary had said, was, okay, if we have this many people come to our webinars right now and we sell this many pro memberships, this is what it works out to. And we're like, well, that means if we have this many people come to our webinar. So we made one little change. And this forever changed Bigger Pockets was we simply put it in the sign-up process. We have a free account so people would sign up. We simply in the sign-up process said, would you like to attend a webinar on real estate?
Wow.
And overnight, 10 times more people started coming to the webinars.
Wow.
And we started selling 10 times more pro memberships and helping 10 times more people.
Wow.
And it was overnight. It was a 10-year overnight kind of a thing, but it was that exact thing. And I don't know if I would have got there to ask that question had it not been for the conversation with David Green, which came from you guys and Gary Keller.
I love it, connecting the dots, looking back. That is so cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. And so I use that today. We literally did that same thing at Open Door Capital, is how do we get $50 million of real estate? And it was, okay, let's work backwards. If we did this many offers, we did this many and we had a number. So we, every quarter, every year, since doing that, we have numbers of offers that we're going to make because it should trickle down, and it always does.
And if you're tracking them, you can adjust. Where's our conversion rate falling apart?
Yes.
And it usually is a symptom of something in the market that you haven't adjusted to yet.
Yes.
So it becomes kind of your heads up display, not just for your goals, but where do we need to adapt to the market?
Yeah.
By the way, we just invested with you.
Did you?
Yeah.
Hey,
3-pack.
You're a 3-pack.
Oh, you're awesome. I love the 3-pack. That's going to be a good one.
Yeah.
That we got a ridiculously good deal on that one. But those happen once in a while where you're just like right place, right time, the thing lands, and we get this massive discount. So thank you for investing in Open Door Capital. Where was I going to go with that? Now I'm lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
Oh, I know. Just here at the conference today, I had a young kid. I bet no more than 20 years old. He said, like, we were tons of people around, shaking hands, and he goes, "Hey, what's your best advice on marketing?" And I was like, that's a big question. And I said, well, what kind of marketing are you talking about? He goes, like getting leads, like getting deals. Like, I need deals. What's your best marketing advice? And I said, if I had to boil down all marketing advice down to one thing, it could be marketing for investors, for deals, to sell books, to sell a product, doesn't matter. It all boils down to, I said, figure out what that backwards funnel looks like, and then set goals for each one and ask, how do I hit them? That's it. Like, it's like, okay, if I had, and you can hypothetical the whole thing. If I had 3,000 people on my list, and if this many people called me, and this much was my average, income, or my average sale, this is how much I would make. Great. So define what you want to make, work backwards, and now you have 3 or 4 very simple goals to go target. So if you have a web business, you just say, okay, well, if I had 10,000 people on my website, and they converted at 1% to my email list, and 1% of them bought my product, I would make this, and my product was this much money, this is how much I get. And I like, just set a number for each one and then ask, how do I hit that? If that's all you do, you're guaranteed to be a millionaire.
And then in the future, like, how can I go from 1% to 2%?
Yes. Yeah, asking that question.
Yeah, how can I maximize it?
Oh.
So was he crestfallen with that answer? Because in my experience, most people, they want to hear a tactic.
Yes. Yeah.
They don't want to. You actually told them strategy.
Yeah.
That's it.
Which is not as exciting as a silver bullet. Like, no, there's hard work involved in this, but that was great advice.
Yeah, I think what people want to hear is just do subject to, and you'll get, go do a lease option.
Do a bunch of bandit signs.
Yeah. And it's like,
yeah.
No, just define your funnel and just go after it.
Yeah.
All right, Wendy, when did you get into the real estate agent world? I don't want to go investing next, but agent world, when did that happen?
Well, I actually was an investor first.
Oh, were you? Okay, let's do investing first. You
Yeah.
mentioned the phrase earlier, I wrote it down. That was the start of our net worth journey. I like that idea, net worth journey. Mm-hmm. What was the start of your net worth? Like, how did you start your net worth journey? What is that?
So Jay, in his first year at Keller Williams, came home and he'd had a conversation with Mo Anderson, who was then the president or CEO of president.
She was CEO.
Yeah, CEO of KW. And at the time, we were renting, and the class that Mo was teaching was on how to read a balance sheet. And as luck would have it, Jay was the only one that showed up. And Mo is a slightly terrifying figure. And what I love about it is that Mo chose to teach the class to Jay anyway, one person.
She said, oh, goody, instead of a class, we'll have a coaching session, which my eyes started, my veins ran cold. I was like, oh.
But what I love that, because I do a lot of teaching, and I used to think like, oh, I want a certain number of people there. But the reality is that there's always the right number of people there, because they're there for a reason, and they're going to take away something from it. And I think about how many lessons you've imparted to millions of people over the years on wealth building. And so then Jay came home and he said, well, we need to start thinking about tracking our net worth, because your conversation with Mo.
We had to fill out a mortgage application and find out what our net worth was. Remember? And I asked you very seriously, because we just bought some furniture at Target. It's like, can we include that? We had no idea.
We didn't know. Yeah. Because we'd been living in New York for 10 years, which we didn't have a single friend who owned anything. And we moved to Austin, and the rent was really cheap. So we were like, we're going to rent forever. This is awesome. And so then that really sparked us thinking about buying our first home.
Well, what was our net worth the first time we did it? Do you remember?
It was about $2,200.
$2,200.
Yeah, which included a crappy old Tercel.
That and my 401k.
That caught on fire like 3 years later.
You made this observation. At that point, Wendy and I together have been working for 10 years professionally. And all we had
20 years.
20 years.
20 years together, 10 years each. And all we had was $2,100 to show for it.
And I was like putting money in my 401k and doing all the things. We didn't have any credit card debt.
Because
you had school debt.
I had school debt.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like, it was good in a way because it was positive. And yet at the same time, we weren't young. We were 30. And so that a few years after that, after we started tracking our net worth, we said, you know what, let's set some big goals for ourselves. So that's when we
bought a house because of that, directly because of that. We bought our first house.
And so, yes, we said we want to become net worth millionaires in 10 years. We said we want to become net worth millionaires. We want to have $75,000 in passive income, and we want to own 10 rental properties. And I can remember thinking, because I grew up in a, kind of a scarcity-minded household, lower middle class. And I remember thinking, like, what? That's crazy. Like, we are never going to become millionaires. Yeah. Like, I was literally, my mindset was like, that's insane. And I was willing to, like, do the things. And one of the things was tracking our net worth. So every month we started, for those of you that don't know, probably everybody does that's listening, but it's everything you own minus everything you owe. And so in 6.5 years, we became net worth millionaires.
Was it all through real estate?
Yeah.
Yeah, mostly.
We did not hit our 75,000 goal, and our aha was like in Austin, Texas, with high property taxes. Like we needed a different strategy to get the unearned income. It was also good. It's like unearned income is hard. You can get the paper value of things to go up.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the actual cash flow from it is a different set of skills.
I think I made a joke on stage today. I was like, we were making three grand a month in
that's
cash
so
flow,
true.
and in reality, like,
it's
never
like
is.
$1,100.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like you make $3,000 one month, and then the water heater goes out, and then you make no money.
100%.
Yep.
100%.
And then the next month you make $2,000, and then the stove goes out.
And so we always focused on our net worth because we always lived way below our means. And, Jay was probably one of the lower paid employees at KW at the time. I worked for the state of Texas.
Well, someone gifted me with the knowledge that I was the lowest paid person in the building when I was trying to negotiate for a raise, thinking that would encourage me. It was just depressing as hell.
Ooh, yeah.
But I mean, I say that because I think sometimes people now are like, oh, well, you're Jay and Wendy and you worked for Gary and you made all this money. And we started out, Jay was making about 40, I was making about 40. And then I actually quit my job because I got pregnant and decided to stay home with the kids and really focused on real estate investing. So
for the first, on that call it 7 years, the journey, for the first 4.5, our total household income was less than $100,000, and we were just trying to see how much we could invest. And because we did side gigs and side hustles, and probably both were doing about $10,000 in extra work on the side.
We had always did the side hustles.
Yeah, but we managed to invest about 35% of what our total income was in those early years. And you look at our net worth, a huge chunk of it is those initial investments that we bought. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
When we were really poor, like some of those turned out really well. They've also had the longest amount of time to compound.
Yeah.
Well, and I can remember so we bought our first house after that conversation. We lived in it for 3 years until right before Gus was born. I said, listen, if we're gonna stay married, I need another bathroom. And so we moved out of our 1-bathroom house. And I can remember the first tenants that we had, they actually made more money than we did. And it was a huge aha for me because they pulled up in the driveway in their BMW and they made more money than us. And I thought, wow, here we are. You're renting from us. I just couldn't believe it. It was like, it blew my mind.
Yeah, it almost feels like not fair. Like why doesn't everybody do this?
It blew my mind. Yeah. It blew my mind. And that's just the great education we got with Keller Williams. And so then when I had Gus, I quit my job, and that's basically what I was doing. And I would do everything. I would do the make-readies. I would, I had 2 kids. They were 15 months apart. I would drag them. They'd help me clean. We'd deposit rent checks, and I was, they'd be in the back in their car seats, and I'd be like, say cash flow, or like, we're going to deposit the rent, or like all that stuff when they were little. And it was, we did a lot during those 5 years because I wasn't working. I was working, but I didn't have like a real
flips,
job.
Which were intense, but she could help manage the process.
A couple of flips, and bought a lot of properties.
Did a subdivision.
And we did a lot of work we did a lot of sweat equity because we only had one salary.
Yeah.
Like, remember.
Patching. We're patching the driveway on the duplex and cutting the grass.
I remember painting.
It's good when you earn the right to get some leverage in there. But
that experience, you don't have a lot of money,
you have to. Yeah. You have to. And it actually worked out because that was kind of my mentality anyway. My whole extended family are like farmers, So I was like, well, this is what you do. You just work all day, When
you got tennis elbow painting by yourself is when I said, enough.
Yeah.
Enough.
Yeah.
But it was watching how good she was managing the rental properties and how articulate, like when she was saying, like when the kids our youngest, Edward, was about to go back to school. She's like, remember you asked me, what should I do? And I was like, I'm writing these real estate books. Like, selfishly, it would be really cool, and I think you would be really good if you got your real estate license.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know. I like So like investing was always my first love. And then, thanks to Jay's good coaching and also the Millionaire real estate agent, I started a team really quickly. So I grew my team really fast. Within 5 years, I was making $1 million in real estate. And so that distracted me from the real estate stuff for a long time.
Yeah.
But what's great about that is that allowed us to create, like, we have 5 cash flowing businesses between us. And so that's helped a lot too, because now we have a cash flowing asset to buy the real estate investments.
Yeah, which is something I don't think we talk enough about in the real estate investing world. I mean, most people are coming at real estate with no money.
Yep.
And so they're going to house hack or burr their way or flip their way, wholesale, whatever, into struggling to get, like I did, like you guys kind of did in the very beginning. Yeah, just to figure it out, right? And then there's the people who are they make a ton of money working for Google, and so they take their $300,000 a year extra and they dump it into, syndications or whatever.
Yep.
But there's this middle idea of like, I'm going to generate a business that then, dump, kind of Cody Sanchez style of some kind, whether you build it or buy it, and then you dump that into real estate. Is that kind of what you're referring to there? As you build
I just started I just started as a real estate agent, and then I built it as a business. So now it is a true business.
Yep.
I only work maybe 10 hours a week on my real estate business. Everybody does all the things. I pretend like I have a role in there, but when I don't show up, they're completely fine.
Yep.
And that allowed us to buy a lot of those first.
Well, we made the decision to stay on my salary.
Yeah.
So, and my salary did go up because I got to be an executive, but like, there's a limit. Like, there was a 12-year period where I didn't get a single raise.
Wow, yeah.
And so you're like, still, but like, let's live on my salary. And then whatever the cash flow was from you paid yourself a salary too, but that was
low. I mean, I think at first it was like $45,000.
But all of that
then
money,
all the cash went into buying properties.
Or paying down debt.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean, most people, what they do, and I'm curious your advice against how to avoid this, but they just increase their spending to the level of what they make. That idea of, I mean, like when I used to drive around the country with my wife, we'd sleep in the back of our car. Sure. And then at some point we got a Super 8 motel. And then, at some point we upgraded to the Hilton. Maybe a Garden Inn and Suites, not the official Hilton, right? We couldn't afford that. And then it was, okay, maybe Marriott, right? And now here I am like, this Four Seasons sucks. They didn't, have a butler. Like, it's not that bad.
No,
but there's that.
No, it's true.
There's that.
That is really true.
Yeah. So how does somebody avoid the
creep.
A psychological, the creep from a psychological standpoint? How do you avoid that when you have the money? How do you invest it or pay down debt
I'm really
instead?
thrifty, so for a long time I was just like a hardliner about it. Like even what's weird about it when you're thrifty is that even when you can afford things, sometimes you don't want to spend the money on it. Like a couple years ago, Jay was like, "Wendy, I need a new Kindle." And he's like, the only way it works is if it's plugged in. I was like, well, just read it when it's plugged in. And he's like, Wendy, this is ridiculous. And I was like, oh, fine. Like but like my first instinct was to like, let's
You spent
save
COVID
it.
playing with compound interest calculators and looking at where our current net worth could go after reading a couple of really good books.
I read Simple Path to Wealth.
J.L. Collins' book, if you ever.
That changed my life.
And I just remember after like the second time that you'd kind of gone through that.
I was like, we are good.
You're like,
babe,
you
we're
can
fine.
start spending money now.
I was like, we're fine.
Thank you.
Have you guys read Die with Zero?
I just read that.
Did you? Yeah, that was a cool one.
That changed my life too.
She's scaring me a little bit. She's like, we're going to spend all of our money.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
I'm
I'm
like,
willing to be less thrifty, but
Can you explain Die with Zero for those who haven't read it?
Okay, so it's by Bill Perkins, and it's really good because he talks about the different stages of your life. And I spent a lot of my 20s, so I had 2 trips around the world, one with Jay, one by myself. After I graduated from college, I spent about a year and a half traveling around the world with a backpack. And then I lived in New York. I was very poor, but had a lot of fun. And so I always felt sort of bad, like, oh gosh, I didn't start doing all these things early enough. I didn't get married until I was almost 30. And he talks about how when you're in your 20s, you're never going to be able to spend so little to have that great of a return on it. And I think about, I traveled through the Middle East. I estimated I spent about $6 a day in Egypt.
Wow.
I spent a couple $100 to spend. And now if we went back, I mean, we'd spend a couple $100 on dinner.
Yeah.
Literally dinner. And so he argues that you're just never going to ever be in a place where you can spend so little money and get and extract so much joy and happiness out of it. And so it's like constantly reminding yourself about that. But then he also talks about how when you have money, so many people have this old idea in their head that they're going to give their money to their children when they die.
Yep.
And what he says is, you know, maybe you're 88 years old when your kid,
Yep.
when you die, or maybe you're 108 when you die, and your kids are already 75 years old. At that point, they probably made a life for themselves, and like maybe they could have used a leg up in college, or maybe you've got a kid who turns out to be a single mom and they could use a little help getting a housing or something like that. So he talks about if you're going to give money away to your kids, like do it when they need it, which is usually when they're young. And then he talks also about charity. It's like, I can remember Jay's dad, Jay's parents are both incredibly charitable, and his dad started a scholarship fund. Mm-hmm. And I always thought, oh gosh, you know, why didn't he wait till he dies?
Yeah.
But he really wanted to see.
Yeah, you see the
He wanted to see the impact of it.
Yep.
Because we're not going to be able to see any of it when we die. So it's like that idea has convinced me to just give away more money in the moment. Like our, you know, charitable goals have increased. Our, you know, all of those things have increased. It's just I love that book.
Yeah.
It's my top 3 books of, you know, the last 5 years. Yeah.
I really enjoyed it too, and it was just
this is a much better explanation. I just hear her saying, "We're going to spend it. We're going to do it."
Money.
Now I got the full picture.
Well, you
so
should read it. I told you.
Well,
to
he
read
makes
it.
so many points about majority of wealthy people die with so much
wealth.
They didn't spend it, and then people fight back. They're like, "Well, you know, what about giving away?" Well, that's not. He's not saying spend it frivolously. He's going to spend it on charity then, but do it in your life.
Yeah.
Watch the impact.
Yeah.
Give it to your kids, like you said. The average inheritance is you're 67 years old. Like the average person who gets an inheritance is 67 or 64 when they get their inheritance.
Yeah.
They're already rich. Like,
exactly.
They're done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or it's just too late to do anything meaningful for their life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a really powerful book.
Actually reminds me a bit in the one thing that you have that story in there, which stays with me to this day about, I think I'm going to probably butcher it and you remember more than I do, but it's like a box of fabric where somebody was like waiting until the end of their life.
Yeah.
They're going to go travel after
Gary's
retirement,
mom.
right? And then they died and they never got to use. Do you remember that? Like,
yeah, it was Gary's
Mother-in-law.
mother-in-law was, she would buy fabric and thrifty. She would make dresses that she planned to wear in her retirement. And when you do that, you're kind of making a bet that you're going to be there and healthy enough to enjoy it. And nobody's guaranteed that.
Yeah, and that's Die with Zero in a nutshell. So really, you wrote the book first, is what I'm trying to say. and Bill Perkins just clearly took your idea. Fantastic book about that. So speaking of Gary, we talked about Gary. I mean, Gary is arguably one of the most brilliant entrepreneurs in the world. Mm-hmm. Super wealthy. I don't know if he's on the billionaire level yet, but probably somewhere near there. What have you learned? Both of you, actually, you both are close with Gary Keller. What have you learned being in his proximity over the last several decades of your life?
The gift of working with him is this idea that we can always think bigger. That's his superpower.
That's what I was gonna say.
He's always thinking bigger for the people he cares about than they have thought themselves, and he can make you see it.
Yeah.
And that's been a real constant gift. Like every time we think we're thinking big, he'll remind us that we could still think bigger, ask bigger questions of ourselves and our life.
Yeah.
And I like to grow. So it's a little bit unrelenting, and there are days where I feel like he's shaking the tree and I'm ready just to fall off. Yeah. But it also makes you strong, and I'm super appreciative of that part of the journey.
Yeah, very cool.
Well, and I think also this idea of coming from contribution, which is for me always been teaching and podcasting and really giving back. And that can change your life. The best way to learn is definitely to teach.
Yeah.
And so, Gary shared that with me early on, and I just took that to heart, and I teach all the time. I teach in my real estate office. I teach my team. I'm podcasting. And that's how I've grown.
Yeah. It definitely makes you better when you teach somebody else. In fact, I once heard a study, and I don't remember where I read it, and maybe it's fake, but the idea was like people always say like, how do you retain the best? You remember, what is it, like 10% of what you read and 20% of what you this, and people often say, oh, you remember most of what you teach, but then some study said it's not necessarily what you teach, it's what you think you have to teach. And so like when I read a book, like the underlining thing, I always tell myself, I'm gonna have to teach this later. And I convince myself, because I probably will have to teach it at some point, but if I'm reading with a pen and assume I have to then teach it, that's when you really solidify that information. And
I love it. You're reading not just to understand it, but to help other people understand it.
So if you read with the frame and the mindset that I will have to help somebody else figure this out later. So I'll even tell myself, I got to tell Heather this. Even though I know I probably won't, I might tell her 2% of what I think I'm going to tell her later in terms of book reading. But I just think, I got to tell this to Heather later, or I got to make a video about this for Instagram.
Yep.
And then I instantly you retain. And so, when people, I tend to remember hundreds of books that I've read, and like that's how I think I can do it is, and probably you as well, because you both are teachers.
Yeah.
And so you remember what you read because of that. Let's completely shift gears.
Okay.
What do you love about each other? Who wants to go first? What do you love most?
The thing that drives me crazy. She's an extrovert, right? So she pushes me to be uncomfortable, whereas I would love to be in my cave with a book or watching a movie. Like my favorite date night is sitting in the dark theater holding her hand, but we don't actually have to talk.
Yeah.
But I know, because I want to stay married, that we get to do other things too. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, is that it's not the parts where we've been very alike and we have the amazing, like we both want to be entrepreneurial, we both like to give, we both like to teach, we both like to read, we both like, all of that's great. It's the part where we're ultimately opposite.
Yeah.
You live long enough with that and you realize it's actually really good for you.
Yeah.
My good looks.
Obviously, your six-pack abs. Well, for me, the thing that always drew me to Jay was he's incredibly curious. He has an insatiable mind for interesting information. And I'm just someone who I kind of think most people are boring. And Jay has always been very, very interesting. And I mean, just from listening to him, you can tell how smart he is and how much he studies. And sometimes I feel like I learn more at breakfast, than most people do in a lifetime. So I'm lucky that way.
Collecting those dots.
What about your kids? What do you love about each of your kids?
With one of our children in the room.
Well, I will say with Gus, who's here, he's incredibly kind and empathetic. So there's 3 of us in the family, and we're all kind of like the drivers who don't have as much empathy. And so whether he was born that way or he kind of ended up that way, he's almost like the glue that holds our family together with his empathy and kindness. And then both of my kids are incredibly creative. I have so many memories of them as kids. They did this thing where they called it the game, where they basically acted out like a story together. And they're both incredible writers, very deep thinkers, gifted artistically. Our youngest is gifted artistically, drawing. And so, they're both really creative, which, living in the business world, you understand how the world actually needs a lot more creativity and less business.
Yes, so much more.
Yeah.
I just read a book called Simplicity Parenting by a guy named John Kim Payne, I think it is. And it was written like before the iPhone was invented, but around that time. But it talked a lot about screen time, even before that was a problem. He kind of foresee the problem. But he made this really interesting point in there about kids that are put into sports too early. Organized sports, baseball, whatever, at like 5, 6, 7 years old. They learn to operate in rules versus creatively. And so he talks a lot about like not putting kids in sports too early, so you can develop that piece of their mind. Because once you skip that part of their life and put them into, this is how the world works, these are the rules, this is your role, don't learn other roles like we learn in sports. You don't get that back.
Well, and that was one of the reasons we put our kids in kind of an alternative education environment, because a lot of that creativity was being squeezed out of them at the public school that they were at, and it was a great public school.
Yeah.
But they would come home, and it was like their love of learning was getting squeezed out of them. And as someone who is a lifelong learner and desires to be a lifelong learner for my life, the rest of my life, it just made me really sad to see that. And
Edward was like reading 800-page books at home by himself, but could not be assigned more difficult reading in class until he was formally in the honors program. And we're like, really? He has to read like Matilda when he's reading this giant novel. And it was like, they didn't, it's not that there was anything wrong. It was a blue ribbon school. But if you've got an edge case, they were very rules-based around the edges. And that doesn't serve every child equally.
Yeah.
So that you did Acton Academy, right?
Yeah.
Can you explain Acton for those who don't know what Acton Academies are? Like what? It's a very weird, unique concept.
It's weird.
Yeah. So
We could get Gus is here. He can talk
yeah,
about
actually,
it. Yeah.
Gus, are you interested in chatting too? You want to come
Yeah,
over and?
here.
All right, we're gonna bring this is the first
Special
for the podcast. Yeah.
guest, Gus Papasan.
Guest appearance.
There we go. All right. First of all, maybe let's hear it first from Gus. What is Acton Academy?
So, to put it in a nutshell, Acton is, for one, very small school. There are 14 kids in my high school. I'm going to be in a graduating class of 3, so it's very small. Ours is like a medium size. There's some bigger ones. There are a lot of smaller ones, but the core focuses of Acton are Socratic discussion. We have a lot of talking.
What does that mean? Socratic discussion.
So, basically, in a lot of our learning and just in general, so for one, the big thing is the students make most of the rules. We have something called town hall every week where students get together, we can voice new systems we want to create, grievances, and we as a community make rules to solve that. The teachers, or the guides as we call them, don't mess with that at all. We can and have made stupid rules, and I'll tell a very famous example of this back in middle school. So we clean the studio at the end of every day. And so, sorry, I gotta get off. I'm gonna be hopping around tangents here. We also have a currency system called Eagle Bucks, and we use it to. It's kind of a fine, like a punishment system where if someone is distracting you or being bothering, you can fine them an Eagle Buck, and they get it deducted. And there's punishments for going negative, and you can buy stuff with it. It's mainly just so we can keep each other accountable in the studio. But yeah, so at the end of the day, we clean, and so we made a rule that okay, for every piece of trash you have on the ground, you get fined 1 Eagle Buck flat. And someone had at some point torn a piece of paper, a wrapper, to shreds, which counted up to like 64 Eagle Bucks or something stupid. And like they had immediately gotten mad at the person who'd fined them for that. And then it had gotten heated, and so there was no real solving it. And it was a whole mess. And our guide likes to bring that up a lot as like, yeah, it's part of the process. Is we learned that okay, yeah, that didn't work, and we took that out. But the biggest part of Acton, in my opinion, that kind of defines the most is self-driven learning. We don't go to classes. We have a lot of group work. Every 5 to 7 weeks, we have a session, and there's like a group project we're all working on. But most of our work, math, reading, writing, is okay. This is all the stuff you have to do to finish high school. Go get them, champ. You assign your own work every day. We have running partners and accountability groups that we've created as a studio to help us with that. But at the end of the day, I have to sit down on my computer and make myself do math. There's no one that's going to tell me to do it. And if someone is telling me to do it, it's because I've asked them to do. For instance.
Mom.
Yeah, mom, yes. Yeah, I'd say that's the biggest part of it. There's a lot of other stuff where the community's small and we have a lot of discussions, and those are all really cool parts of it. But I think that's the biggest thing that sets Acton apart is self-driven work.
Yeah.
It's easily, as someone with ADHD, it is easily the hardest part for me as well, and has made me struggle with the school the most. It's just, I have to go make myself do things. And while it's really hard, it's definitely a lesson I'm glad I learned.
Yeah.
So setting goals, striving to achieve them, all that stuff.
And public speaking, I'm guessing, is a piece of it based on how well you can talk.
Yes,
I don't know
I
how
would say
18-year-olds can talk
to brag a little bit, a lot. I would say I'm pretty good at it for my school. I do run. At this point, I run a lot of when we do parent exhibitions. I'm usually the one who steps up and does talking. But yeah, we all have to talk in the group, and just the Socratic way of it, where it's like, okay, everyone has a voice in the community and is going to talk, and naturally leads to a lot of that. But we also focus on it as well.
Yeah, wild. And I mean, what was that like when you were looking at the school? I mean, that's a big jump from public school to say we're going to go do this. Like, was that, like, maybe we'll start with Wendy. Would that freak you out? Was this a big risk? What was your mind on?
Well,
choosing that?
so we had looked into Acton because several of our friends had taken the Acton MBA, which is a MBA for entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And that was started by Jeff and Laura Sandifer, who actually started the Acton Academy as well. And we had gone when you were like 5, I think. They did a session for Austin, and there was a really long waiting list. It was like
There were 99 couples applying for 2 open positions, and I recognized 7 different couples that I knew had been in the MBA program. And I just turned to Wendy. I was like, do we even want to wait around? Because one of them will get it. But I was happy we toured the studio because they were doing one of their projects for that semester was write a best-selling book. And I looked up there, and one of the students was there. You just got to talk to them and said, so what was this? Well, we had to come up with a book idea, and then we had to go sell it door to door. And whoever pre-sold the most copies of the book won the contest. And they'd brought in a local publisher, Clint Greenleaf, to talk to them about. I was like, it's like they designed it just to seduce me. And I was like, and our child will be denied it because there's only 2 open spots.
Yeah.
And then we found out about another Acton
And then we
opening.
found out about another one. Yeah. And what kind of did it for us is our youngest came home from first grade, and it was this worksheet that he had, and it said, draw a picture of yourself in first grade. And he drew a picture of himself behind a desk with tears rolling down his face with a thought bubble with a dragon in it. And I thought, this is not the place for you. And so we ended up getting into another Acton that was being formed. That one did not go well.
Yeah, that one was not great.
Yeah.
But
And why is that?
I can go into a multitude of reasons. It was not well run. It wasn't like they were not following the curriculum at the end too.
It was not.
There was a whole host of
They
problems.
ended up dropping out.
Yeah,
of Acton.
it wasn't like a fundamental any interesting difference. There was just problems. But after that, we went to one that I graduated from this last Friday. So
Congrats.
it was very good.
Yeah.
So
Very cool. All right. Wow. Acton Academies. Yeah, I've known a number of people as well in Austin and elsewhere that have done it. And if I had one in Hawaii, I think I would.
Well, I think
consider it.
there's like 500 in process of
There's
being formed,
there's
and
a
some
lot
people, it's a good little cash flowing business.
Yeah, I
I've
know. I
heard.
thought of that too. I'm
Yeah.
like, is it worth building one? Maybe.
Yeah.
yeah, I will say on that note that it's interesting because running it's Actons are weird because they in the nature of the system is Actons can very easily be kind of made or broken. Well, anyone can definitely start one.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to run a good one for 2 reasons. Is one, you need to have. It's nice having a good owner. Like our head guy Joey is wonderful, and he's really awesome. But also like, you have to have like a good students for it. Because we've had a lot of people that have come into the school and been not great for it. Even though it's a pretty extensive application process.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if people don't want to do this stuff, it doesn't get done. And so it's really nice where it's like with our school, because once you build a foundation and enough people in it, even if someone's not super would not be immediately into it, they can kind of they'll mix with the culture well and they'll learn and they'll be better. But starting it can be pretty hard because we had a lot of with our old one, there was looking at it again, there was a lot of fundamental problems that were there kind of at the start that just never really got better because the beauty and the curse of Acton is it's a bunch of kids running the whole show themselves, and if the kids rise to that challenge and do well, it's awesome. If they don't, it can be not great. So
Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Lord of the Flies style.
Yeah.
They're all in. Well,
Yeah.
Gus, that's awesome, and congratulations on
Thank you.
your graduation. That's a huge thing in life.
I'll give my dad back his spot. Adios.
Dude, I love it. First time on this podcast. First time I've ever had somebody's kid come into a podcast episode. I love it. I love it. All right. So I'm going to stay on this topic just for a couple more minutes. You know, the podcast is called The Better Life, right? With Brandon Turner. That's me. But and it's not just wealth. We've talked a lot about wealth today. And I want to talk a little bit about marriage and parenting just for a few minutes before we get out of here. What does it mean, or how does one obtain a better marriage? What's worked for you guys?
Well, can I go back? I didn't get to answer the
please.
parenting thing.
Please.
I was going to say what I love about our kids, because this plays into that, right?
Yes.
If you know my 2 tattoos, I was thinking about it while Wendy was answering, and the thing I love most about both my kids is that they made me a father. And that in being a father, there was a different level of accountability that naturally showed up for me. I respond well. Like, I can come home and say I'm a writer, but if I'm not writing, they see what you do, not what you say.
Yeah.
And that held me to a higher standard for myself. And that was a huge gift, right? To be, if I tell them I want you to do these things, I feel compelled to do those things or try to do those things. And I thought that was a great gift for me. I respond well. Like, they're counting on me to be concentric to the advice I give. And that's made me a better man. So that's
beautiful.
Is that selfish? But I think that's absolutely what I love about both of them, is that they made me be a dad, which made me be a better person.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, why don't we then stick on the parenting side just for a minute longer?
Okay.
I'll ask the marriage one in a second, so you can think on that in the back of your head. But what have you done to be good parents? Like, what works for you? What hasn't worked for you? I mean, you've got 2 great kids, so something's worked well.
Well, we saw Ed Milet recently, and he said that not living out your potential is a form of child abuse, essentially. And so I have been a present mom, but I've also been pursuing what I love and helping other people in the process. And I think kids, they see you, they see what you're doing. And so for me to kind of like live out my mission, which is to empower and inspire big thinking leaders to create lives of abundance, and all the charity work that we do and all the things that we pour into people, like, they've seen all that, and we've made them a part of that, has been, hopefully, I mean, we can get Gus to weigh in on it a little.
Yeah.
That sounds
What did they get
terrifying. No, I don't want to hear it. But I think that's just like living your best life is really important, because it gives your kids, because my kids are very different than me. They're very different. And I live with 3 super deep thinkers, introverts. Sometimes I feel like I'm the shallow one in the family. But just like them watching me pursue my dream has been hopefully a gift to them, which allows them to do that too. So,
What do you think, Jay?
I think pretty early on, I know that you and Heather do a goal-setting retreat.
Yep.
We do one too. And when we talk about our key relationships, we would ask the question, what are we going to do? Like, what are the goals that we need to have around Edward or Gus this year? So we were able to put a framework around what is it that we can do or need. And that started some of our family habits. Like, I can't remember who read it first, but like, when you have dinner at the table without media playing, like, just that act, your kids have lower instances of drug addiction and depression. It's like, it gives you an opening to have a conversation. And even if it's what you do at school, nothing, right? There's that, but there's that regular, and then we added to that the habit of gratitude. And every day we say, what's your one thing that you're grateful for? And everybody has to go around the table. And we've made that a ritual.
I love it.
And so I think we've institutionalized a few routines. I think, Gus is a huge reader. Edward was a huge reader for a long time. And now I guess manga counts as reading. It's also got the visual and the design.
Yep.
But like, I know that that's great for their minds.
Yep.
So hopefully we challenge them and did okay, and then set some routines that might serve them when they're not in our home.
Well, I think there's power in, you use the word ritual, family ritual. And I think there's, like, that's a book title right there in itself someday. It's like family rituals are.
I'd buy it.
Yeah, right? You just, like, what are the things that we do? What do we stand for? What do we do regularly? And teaching your kids that, you know, the phrase I say all the time is you get the results of what you repeatedly do. So, like, a ritual is dinner at the table. In fact, you know, I have my habit tracker. I do it every day in my little Better Life book. And one of my habits I'm always tracking is, did we have dinner together 4 times a week? You know, I work a fair amount of evenings in terms of like people visiting, and we're in Hawaii, and we don't do a lot of sit down at the table. So I was like, I saw that, and I read actually that in Simplicity Parenting. He talked about it as well, about just the shocking drop in almost every negative thing a kid can go through when you have dinner at the table.
Yeah.
That's like one of the biggest. So I was like, all right, Let's start at 4 times a week.
Yep.
Like, am I hitting that goal 4 times a week? But that became a ritual. Asking the questions become a ritual. I got a friend, Jefferson Bethke, who I'm coming on the show at some point, and they do like this candle lighting ceremony at like Sabbath dinner every Friday night, and they light these candles, and they say the same thing. It becomes this ritual. And I think rituals are missing from Western civilization.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
And also something you said, this is what we do as a family. I think part of this is like you're setting standards of what it means to be a Papasan or a Turner. And you hope that those get passed on to another generation. Like, I think it's not just important for our kids, but maybe like, I know that we are consciously or unconsciously doing some of the stuff our parents taught us.
Yes.
Sure.
So hopefully the good stuff sticks and the bad stuff they just ignore.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've worked on our marriage a lot, and so I'm hoping that one of the gifts we gave our kids is what a loving partnership looks like, and it's a true partnership. I mean, we're partners in business, we're partners in life, we're partners in parenting, and we don't always agree, and we do, we're both like drivers, so of course we like bicker a lot around the house, and hopefully they see the resolution of that. But I can remember when our kids were little, every time we would go off to date night, especially Edward would just be crying in the driveway as we drove
I'm in
away,
that right now every week.
and
It's tough.
it's so hard. And now they're like, oh, yay, they're gone. And
Let's get P. Terry's.
yeah. I mean, they're so old now, but just that idea of, like, I always tell my kids, listen, I love you guys. Like, I love you with my whole heart, but I love your dad more. Like, I picked him. You guys are random. Like, I love you guys. But I picked him.
Yep.
And so hopefully showing them what a loving, powerful marriage looks like.
Yeah, I just talked about that with a woman named Brooke Weinstein. You guys know Brooke at all? She's in Austin. Amazing kind of child family expert. Anyway, amazing lady. But we talked a lot about my kids are in that phase right now. If mommy or daddy go on a date, like they just, the other
So
day,
hard.
one on each leg, holding on,
no.
screaming and crying. I had to
Yeah.
push them off my leg
Oh,
to
it's so
run out the
hard.
door.
It's so
and
hard.
slam the door.
And you
lock it.
hear as soon as you're out of sight.
I know.
they're
They're fine.
Yep, they text 2 minutes later, the
They're fine.
babysitter. Yep, they're totally fine.
Yeah.
In fact, this morning when we were coming down to the event here, I had my keynote at 9 o'clock. It's 8:40, and Wilder's grabbing Heather's leg and just screaming, no, no, no. And the entire walk down the hallway out of our hotel room was him screaming and crying. And we were at the bottom of the elevator, and she got a text. He's totally fine. He's playing now. I'm like,
It's heartbreaking, though.
So yeah, but I 100% like those date nights. Even in the face of that,
Yes.
it's the ritual of
Yep.
the date night that matters, right? So what
Yep.
else besides the date nights? What else do you guys do as a couple to strengthen your relationship?
We work out together.
Do you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what year it was.
It was a long time
It's
ago,
been like
10
15
years ago.
Wendy started going with her friend Jenny to Camp Gladiator, and she was doing it in the mornings. And I'd had back surgery, or I was about to, and I wanted to work out. And I was like, how do we work this out? Like, we had 2 small kids.
Yeah.
And so we ended up figuring
Hiring.
out how to get your Camp Gladiator trainer to come to our driveway the hour before they were going to be at that park.
Yeah.
So we started working out at 5 a.m.
And it was expensive.
Yeah.
It's been I would say, of the thing we've spent the most money on that's had the biggest return. For sure, it's
Yeah.
that. For sure, it's that. And it's 100% accountability. Here I am. So, you're going to work out. And we do it 3 times a week. At one point, we were doing it at like 4:45 because that's the way the schedule worked. Now it's at 6.
We wanted to do it
better.
when our kids were that small, where
Well, they're
like,
sleeping.
They're asleep.
Yeah.
And we would hear them wake up, but we would that was the whole point. We can work out together. The kids are safe. They're literally in their cribs.
Yep.
And when we're done is when the morning starts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like we're doing things together. We do a lot of weightlifting.
Doing hard things together,
yeah,
right?
we
You
do a
know,
lot
the,
of-
the
yeah.
gift of, exercise is also
Yeah.
like you set goals.
Yeah, and the
you-
progression of it.
Yeah.
Celebrating that.
And
Yeah.
trainers, if you get to know them well enough, are a little bit like marriage therapy too, right? We're bickering at each other, and poor David is our great. He's trying to be so
And
sweet
some
whenever
mornings-
we're like crossing each other.
Yeah.
But-
yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah,
All right, I'm
yeah.
committing to it right now. I'm gonna start working out with Heather because
I
we've been
love
talking
it.
about it forever, but we haven't done it.
It's
and
the
we have
best thing.
Yeah, we have a million excuses. Oh, the kids are hard to leave and all that. But
So if we call you up in a month,
you're gonna call me up in a month.
Yeah.
We're gonna work out together.
all right,
Knock,
We're
knock,
doing
knock.
it.
Got it.
Accountability's knocking.
Oh, I love accountability. All right, moving on to the next. I got a couple more segments of the show. Next one is something that we're currently calling the 3-2-1. So I'm asking you 3 pivot books in your life, meaning books that have changed the direction of your life, the way that the one thing, and I have answered this question that way, it's the one thing, but what are some pivot books in your life? 3, we'll go 3 each if you can throw them out there.
Okay.
2 influential people that you look up to, and 1 inspirational quote or something that you live your life by. So 3, 2, 1, let's start with the books.
Okay, so I'm going to, this is weird. I can tell you the ones I've read, but one of the books that created more opportunity for me than anything else was the book that I worked on.
Okay.
So I was assigned to work as an assistant editor on Body for Life by Bill Phillips, which is one of the books that Gary opened the acknowledgments and had my name in. And at the time, I hated it. It was a book about weightlifting, and I was a soccer weenie. Yep. And the guys who lifted weights were the guys that would pick on us in high school.
Yeah,
so like everything about it, I was like, I don't like these people so much. The author would only work with us via fax. No email, no phone calls, only fax for writing an entire book between New York and Denver.
I didn't remember that.
Yeah.
Wow.
He was very particular about it was the most effective at that time communication form. People were too casual on email, and letters were too slow. And phone, he didn't want to talk about the weather, but a fax, they had to be. I was like, okay. So we edited that entire book, and it was like painful.
Wow.
But I learned more, and that book went on to sell 6.5 million copies. To this day, I've never been a part of a book that was more successful than the book I probably hated working on the most. Yeah. But I learned the most. And that became like a calling card when I went to work with Ray Bard, the publisher for The One Thing. That's the book that got his attention. And he's like, so you already know what it means to publish a 1 million copy bestseller.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so that would be my number one is if you look at our, all of our books are copyrighted Relic Publishing Partners. And I got that from that author. It was 11th level publishing. And I remember I asked him, why don't you just copyright it in your name? And he goes, well, because I understand business. And if I copyright it in the name of an LLC, I don't have to call the publisher if I want my ghostwriter to get money. I can just do that at another level, and I can claim expenses on it. And this is before I'd read any of the books I've read today. And I was like, oh, that kind of makes sense.
I'm pretty sure all my books are in my name.
Well, now you know. Now you can go back. But it was
Right.
it gave him the flexibility to reward people throughout the journey. And I was like, that's forethought. So I can't tell you all the lessons I learned as a writer from that. And it's also a great workout book. When I opened my mind, I was like, oh, and it was actually revolutionary. You could lift weights and burn more fat than cardio.
Perfect.
Cool.
All right.
Love
Wendy,
that.
what you got?
Well, I think it's kind of cheating, but for sure, it's The One Thing for me.
Yep.
I lived that, especially for someone who likes to do all the things and bounce all over the place. And even now, even though I've read it, I don't even know how many times. Sometimes when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'll just open it up. I'll read a chapter, and it's like a panacea, where I'm like, okay,
Yep.
I can do this.
Did I ever tell you guys? I'm sure I did. But when I read The One Thing the first time, first of all, it was the only book I've ever finished. And then on the last page, I turned it over and I started page 1 again. So I read the whole thing through twice in a row.
Wow.
But then I had the idea. I'm like, what if I applied the concept of The One Thing to my reading? And I said, instead of reading 20 books this year or 30 books, I'm going to read one book 20 or 30 times. So I read The One Thing. That was the only book I read that whole year. I read it 20 or 30 times that year. I would listen on Audible, and I would just, every day when I'd work out, I'd walk, anything, I would listen to The One
I've
Thing
read it so many
over
times.
and over. Yeah,
I need to get you to teach the book and watch you. I want to see what you would teach in the book. Wow.
But I was just like, if I can just get this concept down, if I just get this through my thick skull, everything in my life would be easier. If I could just understand this. And so it made a big impact on me. So anyway, that's why I was a little fangirling when I
love
met you
that.
the first time.
That's amazing. No, that's amazing.
Yeah, that was my book of the year.
Yeah.
I did that also with a book called 80-20 Sales and Marketing by Perry Marshall. I read that one a good 20 times, or I listened to it mostly. And that
I'm
one.
guessing from the title.
I think that's so
similar
powerful.
Yes.
theme, right? Focus on what matters.
Yes, very much so.
I think that's so powerful because I think sometimes we think it's just one and done. And I get people ask me all the time, what are you reading? What are you reading? I'm like, well, what do you need right now? What do you need right now? And sometimes you need to reread a book that was impactful to you. I just reread Simon Sinek's Start With Why.
Yeah.
Powerful book. Powerful book.
is it the Bruce Lee quote about I don't fear the man who's done 1,000 kicks one time, I fear the man who's done one kick 1,000 times,
Yeah.
or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I want reinforcement of the things. Like, we all know what to do, so we just don't do them. So sometimes we just need
Yep.
to reinforce it.
Yep.
Anyway,
Yep.
all right. Well, we're 2 books down to 6. What else you got? For
Okay.
All right,
pivot
so
books?
I'll throw out
Speed booking.
Man's Search for Meaning,
Okay.
Viktor Frankl,
Yep.
right? And that we talked about that earlier, right? That, I mean, if you can choose happiness in those conditions,
Yeah.
there's just none of us have an excuse.
Yeah.
And I actually went back and reread that. It's probably my 3rd time, not 23 times. But like after my dad passed away last year, I was like, you know what? I need to go and get my head back on straight. And it's that book I can go to and just say, you know what? It is all in your head, right? You get to choose how you interpret the world.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Well, I'm going to say The Simple Path to Wealth. We brought it up earlier by J.L. Collins. And that was really what freed me from it just allowed me to understand where our wealth is now and what it's going to look like in the future. And this idea of compound interest was super powerful. So, great
All right.
book.
One more each.
I would probably have 50 books like tied
Yep.
now for like 3rd place.
Yes.
So we've been talking a lot about giving. And so I think I read Adam Grant's Give and Take. And that's a book that I think now, like, what are the books I've given away a ton
That's
of
good.
copies?
I just reread that one too.
I've not read that one.
Oh,
Oh,
it's
so
great.
good.
And there's
Yeah.
some
So
real
good.
takeaways.
I just reread that one.
He talks about 5-minute favors. Like, learn how you can say yes, but yes on your time, and ask for 5-minute favors of busy people,
Yeah.
and do little things to build trust. And he's like, the takeaway is strategic giving. Can I do a little spoiler? It's all in the first chapter.
Yeah.
It's probably on the flap copy. They did a study about whether people were givers, takers, or matchers, right? Givers are the ones that want to give back. Takers obviously are taking all they can get. And matchers are, well, I paid for lunch last time, so it's your turn, right?
Yep.
They definitely want to split the bill or, treat it that way. They're keeping score. And he wanted to know, like, who made the most money. And so they crunched all the numbers, and, like, depressingly, takers were at the top and givers were at the bottom. And the breakthrough was when they went back and really started parsing the data, there was a sliver of givers at the very, very top. And then they asked the question, what made them different? And I love that because I want intrinsically, karmically to be a giver. And I also don't want to have people treading on my back throughout my entire life, right? I don't want to be at the bottom of the pile. And he just defines, now this is the 240-page book, what it means to be a strategic giver, right? How to give strategically so you're not being taken advantage of and you can have an amazing impact. So it's a fabulous book. Go read it. Yeah. I would love to hear you talk to Adam Grant. I've never been able to get him for an interview, so there's your challenge.
All right,
But man, strategic giving, great
All
book.
right.
Love it.
All right.
I'm going to say any book by David Green. No, I'm just kidding.
David Green by David Green. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Every one is amazing.
Actually, the book I was thinking of is something we talked about earlier, which was Die with Zero.
Yeah.
That's been a real mindset shift for me in the last probably 8 months when I read it. A very powerful one. So if you have a lot of wealth, and it's not a book for everyone. It's not for people starting out on their wealth journey at all. It's for people who have amassed a certain amount of wealth. It's just a great perspective on what you should be doing next.
Perfect.
Love it.
All right. 2 influential people. We'll do one each. Somebody who's made an influence on your
Well,
life.
I mean, like I've already said it. Like I think one of them is this lady right here.
That's what I was gonna say. I was
yeah.
Oh,
And
you
we didn't
too.
prepare- And
All right,
we
now I'm
did
making you say 2
know.
each.
Yeah. The other one's kind of obvious for me, and it was like I think about the 2 people who had the biggest impact outside of my parents. Like,
Yeah.
so we're going to cheat
Sure.
and go all the way back there.
Sure.
But Gary,
Yeah.
before I started working at Keller Williams, which was his ultimately creation, I thought that the way to get ahead was my dad had been an executive. You go and you work at a company, you work for 25 years, which I'm kind of doing that. I'm 24 years in.
Yeah.
But and you do the raise game and the executive game. And when we had to interview 120 millionaires for the...
Timer went off.
I'll
I
go
don't know
back.
what that is.
And when we interviewed for the Millionaire Real Estate Investor, I had to do 120 interviews with millionaire real estate investors. And like you hear their stories, immigrants, like talking about how magical it is that we can use a mortgage to buy a house.
Yeah.
Like in some countries, they had to save up their whole life and pay cash. And they're like, oh my gosh, your country. And I was like, I got to see this whole, it was like the veil got lifted. And I'm sure a lot of investors have that moment where you suddenly see on the other side and it doesn't look sketchy and risky, like that was all happened after I got into that culture of entrepreneurs at KW and Gary Keller. And I give him the credit because he created that culture. Yeah. And he also directly taught me a lot of the lessons. So he's the only count as my number one since this doesn't count. I got it. I'll come up with another one.
I like that.
Well, and I was going to say Gary as well. So that's kind of cheating, but really for a different reason, because I think about when I see Gary, I think about the lasting impact that one person can really have on the world. Yeah. And he just started with the mission, which was to help people live their best lives. Nothing about real estate. And he's 43 years into it, exemplifying all the principles of the one thing, which is success. Looks different than you think it is. It's repeatable activities done over time. And he's impacted millions and millions of people through being a great mentor, his teachings, his writings, his podcasts, everything he's ever done. And so for me, that's just really inspirational in the way I want to model my life, which is to just continue to contribute to the world.
Beautiful.
Love that.
All right. Well, that's good enough. We got some good
Okay.
people.
All right.
What last question then? Is there an inspirational quote you live your life by?
So I'll rephrase it. There's a quote that I keep on my wall. There's actually two, but that I have to have as a leader. And it's actually from Keith Cunningham, who we mentioned earlier. In his class, I don't know if it's in his book or not, he said, and maybe he was quoting someone else, but I give him credit, nothing changes until what's unsaid is spoken. And what that meant to me at that time, I had to level up, and I went from 7 employees to 44 very quickly. And this idea that, and I learned it through being a manager, but then I realized it applied everywhere in my world. Until I actually tell people explicitly what my expectations of our relationship are, it's really unfair for me to judge them for anything else. And I don't like conflict.
Yeah, same.
And so having those hard conversations was very hard for me. And so to learn how to be a business leader, to be a leader, I had to move faster and then realize that it was a gift to them. They can't meet my expectations if they're just guessing all the time. And so, that applies as being a parent. That applies as being a coworker. That applies as being a spouse. There's all this stuff that we're magically wanting telepathy to fix. That doesn't fly. Yep. So that I keep that in mind, because whenever I find myself judging people, I have to ask now, do they know the standard that I'm holding them against? Because if not, I owe them an apology. And that's usually what I say. Yeah. Hey, I'm so sorry. I was judging you today. And the reason I was judging you is because you were doing your email in a class that we were paying you to go to. But you know what? I never told you that was a standard of mine. Yeah. And I've literally had that exact conversation. And it's been such a gift, because now I can have this mechanism for getting to a better place with those vital relationships. And that's the quote that drives me.
Beautiful.
I love that. So good. Mine is a quote by Helen Keller, and it's "Life is a daring adventure or nothing at all." And I think it's just about living a very brave and authentic life. I mean, we're all here for the journey. It's not about the destination at all. It's really about the journey. And so for me, it's about waking up every day and living a better life.
Perfect. All right. I got a couple more questions and we'll get out of here. This next segment we like to call Past, Present, Future. The question number 1, what advice would you give your past self? This is the past part, past, present, future, past. What advice would you give your past self?
I know. You don't have to do all the make-readies on all those rental properties. You can pay somebody to do that.
Well, this is it's good though. Mine would be no one succeeds alone. I think I was very late to the idea of succeeding through others. And that's the same story.
Yes.
I think if you're successful, Gary calls us all taskers. We got here because we saw what needed to be done and we did it. Yep. And you get really good at doing it. And that makes it even harder, ironically, for you to allow someone to do it for you. And man, I wish I could have gotten that earlier. Yeah. I just wish I could have gotten it a lot earlier.
I'm right there with you. Present, the question is, what is something that you've recently and are currently doing in your life that's giving you a better life? Could be a habit, trait, action, thing.
I know. What are you going to say?
I was going to say, I wonder what would happen if we guessed for each other. But no, we're going to do it. All right, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I have two things, a deep thing and a shallow thing. So my deep thing is we actually hired a director of finance for all of our investments. So every year when we do our couples retreat, we ask ourselves the question, like, what are some things that we're doing that either aren't a good use of our time or somebody else could do better? And I feel like I've fired myself from almost every job. And I was doing a lot of the financial stuff. And so we ended up hiring a director of finance who's in charge of our taxes and all of like our personal finances now, all of our business finances, because we have so many individual things. We don't really have anyone looking at our whole business world as a family. So now we've got access to each other's P&Ls and stuff like that. So that was good.
And all the stuff that we knew that we should do but weren't doing because we knew how busy
Well,
we
and
were.
She made her salary like that in a minute. She's made her salary like
cost
5 times
segregation
over.
on all of our properties.
Yeah, all those things.
Yeah.
I have the same person in my life, and
It's so good.
life-changing,
It's the best. Yeah, it's the best.
All right, so that was a deep
What
one.
was the shallow
That's
one?
my shallow one. Okay, so 1 year ago, I was at InvestorCon and I saw Alicia St. Germain. She has a haircut like me, but her hair looked fantastic. So I went up to her and I said, Alicia, how do you get your hair like that? She's like, Wendy, I'm going to change your life. Aribe hair texturizing spray. Fantastic hairspray, changes your life.
That's
those are
what's
my
on the top of our Target shopping list right now, isn't it?
It's so great. It's really good. It's really good.
It's called Aribe.
Oribe. It's very expensive hairspray. Old me would have never bought it, but it lasts a long time. And especially like it's even holding up in Maui with this humid weather. So a game
your hair
changer.
is on
A
point.
game changer.
Those are my favorite answers, by the way, to that question.
Yeah.
Is like very, very like
Tactical.
particular tactical
It's all
things.
tactical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Jay, what about you?
Oh gosh, I don't have that kind of cool shallow answer. No, I think I told you like a little less than a year ago, I gave myself my first deadline, weekly deadline.
Yep.
And I did it ostensibly to create an opt-in list of our top agents for our company, but I've just loved every minute of it. Is being able to have 100% control, but to do it within a partnership for a bigger goal than just me.
Yep.
And every week, I mean, I'm just working on those writing muscles, and it's very liberating for me.
Awesome.
And they're so good.
They are very good.
Yes.
And I'll ask you in a minute where people can get on that list. But last question for the future one. What do you want your legacy to be?
You just said us, and I'll go. I'm going to say they made an impact. That's my top value. It's like when I think about the compass, and one of your top values is making a difference. It's great to get the reward of money or whatever, but I want to hear that we changed someone's life.
Yeah.
And so making an impact, that's all it is. That's my favorite review. Oh, because I read your book, I walked my daughter to school, and that changed our relationship. It doesn't have to be something big, just something meaningful.
Yeah. Well,
That's my answer.
On a small way, you changed my life, and the lessons I learned from you have, like, we would not be here. The Better Life Tribe would not exist without you.
Aw.
And so the millions of lives that we're going to impact in the future from us as well, is thanks to you too. So
If only everybody would read it 23 times, imagine.
everyone should read it 23 times. All right, Wendy.
For me, it's like I said, living my mission, which is to empower and inspire big thinking leaders to create lives of abundance and do that in an authentic, joyful way.
And you have a Her Best Life. Is that one of the
do.
methods you do that?
Yeah, we have.
is
So we
that?
started this company in 2019, and I had a group of 11 of us that had been meeting in exotic locations as a mastermind. And we said we need to bring this to other people because leaders are lonely, especially women. Leaders, they're very lonely because sometimes we are friends with other moms in our neighborhood, and we'll be at a party and they'll be having discussions about like how hard it was to go to Target, and we have to do all of those things plus run businesses on the side. And so it can be very lonely. And so we've created an organization where women can come and feel like seen by each other and heard. And it's okay to be all of the things. It's okay to be a mom. It's okay to be a real estate investor. It's okay to be a business owner. And we all have the same struggles. We all have each other's backs. So that's been a great, amazing organization I've assembled a great team. We have an incredible executive director. I run it with 6 of my best friends, and that's been an amazing journey. So.
I love that.
Yep.
Well, y'all, where do people best connect with each at?
So,
Find you.
if they want to read my writing, I'd say go to the 20%er, and that links to all my books.
The 20.
The 20%er.
Okay. What does the 20%er mean? What is that?
So it was just looking for something that was on brand, right? The 20%, right? It's the 20% that matters. And people, it was my challenge to write each week about something that mattered and that was also, in my mind, leveraged. So not everything's tactical, but it's meant to kind of get to the heart of what matters. So most of them are like a 3-minute read.
Okay. The 20%.
The20percenter.com. And I mean, come on, Jay Papasan, there's only one in the world as far as I know. So like they can find me. I can't hide.
Yeah, you're there.
Yeah.
Wendy is .fun.
Wendy is .fun. What a great idea for a URL.
Yeah.
I need to do a cool
You can
URL.
do that.
I had the idea one time, I haven't done this, but I thought about every time I go on somebody else's podcast to make a new URL based on that podcast. So like
You can see which one does better.
Yeah, well, it's more of just to make a funny moment in the moment where I'd be like,
that'd
yeah,
be
just go to
funny.
Brandon was the best guest ever on XYZpodcast.com. And they're like, wait, is that legit? I'm like,
Yeah.
that's legit.
Yeah.
Haven't done it yet, but maybe I will.
Yeah, just think of all those URLs you'd have. Those horrible
I have
URLs.
so many long URLs.
Oh, yes.
All right, you guys, I meant it when I said it earlier. You guys are very much my heroes, and I love everything you do in your marriage and your kid raising and your business skills and everything, and your writing and your agenting and everything. So thank you for joining me. It's been an honor.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're gonna end
And the
this way.
feeling
Watch
is
this.
mutual.
Oh, thank you. All right, we need a gigantic fist bump. I'm gonna lean over the table. We're gonna get this. This is gonna be awesome. Ready? The 3-person.
Hold on.
What? And then is Alex coming? He's coming. Okay. Ready? Watch this. Ready?